Welcome back to B-Sides Las Vegas. This is the afternoon session. This is Breaking Ground. And we have Klaus here speaking to us with the title of the talk, Detecting Log4J on a Global Scale Using Collaborative Security. A couple announcements before we do begin. As always, we want to thank our sponsors, especially our Gold and Diamond sponsors, without their generosity, along with our other sponsors, volunteers, and staff, this event truly would not be possible. And I think I share the same sentiment with a bunch of other people that I'm glad that this event in person truly did happen. So hopefully this will just go uphill from here. But regardless, one important announcement. If you are here for the next talk 6 p.m. with the Exclave Experience, Relocating to Almost Canada by T-Profit, that has been moved. Still 6 p.m., but it's moved to a different ballroom. It's now at PasswordsCon in the Tuscany Ballroom. So if you're going to T-Profit's talk, make sure you go to the PasswordsCon and not Common Ground instead. For those of you at home, same thing. The schedule has been updated on the website, so you can just refer to the website. That has the most up-to-date information with all the speakers as they are being changed. But a few other announcements. Again, this is being live streamed just as any other talk has been over the past few days. This will also be posted later on YouTube, so please do make sure that your cell phones are silenced for respect to other speakers as well as those listening on the live stream. And later on during Q&A, I know it's annoying, it's a slightly bigger room, there's not many of us here, so I promise I'll walk a little bit fast, but please do speak into the mic, because otherwise the people online would not be able to hear your question, and we really don't want that to happen. So without further ado, Klaus, the floor is yours, take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Klaus. Welcome to my talk on detecting Log4J on a global scale using collaborative security. But before we start, this is my first talk in Vegas, so I'm really happy about that. But I'm most happy about the fact that my first talk will be at B-Sides, because we all know B-Sides is always the nicest crowd. That's how it is. At Black Hat, they would have killed me. So, but yeah, another thing I want to say before we start is that the best thing that happened in my professional career was when I got fired a year and a half ago from one of the biggest Danish retailers, online retailers. And that's relevant because if I hadn't, then I probably wouldn't have been here today. I've been an InfoSec professional for almost 20 years, and I don't know about you guys, but I just never came around to finding out what I wanted to do for the rest of my professional career. But I did find out at some point that what I liked best about my professional career, about my job, was all the things that I did in my spare time. Which is, I've always been involved in OWASP. I've been an active member of OWASP Copenhagen for 14 years, sorry. And I'm co-founding B-Sides Copenhagen. And what I've loved about that, and always have loved about it, is arranging events and gathering people and see in their eyes that they've had a wonderful time and helping them out. And that's really what I wanted to do. And at some point, I was so lucky to find out that there are people out there who does this for a living. They interact with the community, they give back to the community, which I love to do, of course, and help them out. And eventually, I found CrowdStrike, or CrowdStrike found me, depending on how you look upon it. And now I have the greatest job in the world. So that's it. First, a little bit of background about how CrowdStrike works, because if you don't understand just a little bit about how it works, then you won't be able to understand the data and understand and appreciate the method around Log4J that I will be talking about later. I won't be going into details. This is as high level as I could do it. But let's start with the beginning. The beginning is that as a cybersecurity professional, or at least cybersecurity interested, you know there's something wrong out there, right? There are people out there spending $1 gazillion on cybersecurity, and they're still getting breached. So something is clearly up. I mean, it seems like the whole world has agreed that if you just throw enough money into a big bottomless pit, then everything is going to be all right. Except it's not all right. That's evident for everyone, right? So our point is, and the reason why CrowdStrike is around, is why don't we try something else? For instance, we tried outpowering the bad guys, we tried outsmarting the bad guys. Why don't we try and outpower them. Because if you think of it, there are more of regular people like us than criminals. So why don't we work together and get those bastards, right? Why don't we do that? And then that is basically what CrowdStrike aims to do. But what does this mean in practice? You can think of CrowdStrike as the Waze of cybersecurity, and if you don't know Waze, Waze is a GPS app that basically collects information about how fast your car is going, if there's any accidents or any road repairs or anything around you, and sharing it with everyone else so that everyone has an efficient trip as possible. CrowdStrike does kind of like the same in that CrowdStrike detects logs, CrowdStrike read logs on the service you're running, and it detects those threats and mitigates them afterwards. And there are a number of different ways to mitigate. Then it sends signals back on the attacks that it sees back to our data lake thingy. And after that, all the IPs are being assessed and turned into a block list and shared with the rest of the community. And that happens automatically. Yep. CrowdStrike can detect a number of different attacks. CrowdStrike was originally, I guess, meant to replace fail-to-ban. Fail-to-ban only does brute force attacks, and that's fine. But CrowdStrike can detect a lot of other things on layer 7, for instance, the Log4J that we'll be talking about. And in that sense, CrowdStrike reads the web server log and it detects those special strings. It's not AI or ML. It's basically rule-based, and log parsing and the log scenario file consists of some part of Grok, which then passes the log file. And based on that, it detects attacks and sends them back like I described before. CrowdStrike, this is relatively current stats so that we'll be saying. We collect around 1.6 million signals a day. We have around 4 million IPs in what we call the smoke database, which is 3 days of bad guys. And there's around 20 to 30,000 IPs in this curated block list that I talked about before. And in a later slide, I'll be talking a bit more about the strength of the CrowdStrike network, meaning how big a number are we talking about. But before that, it's important to understand that CrowdStrike is free and open source. And the license we chose for making the open source is the MIT license. And the whole point of that is that once you have open sourced something with the MIT license, then it's not possible to close the source again. And CrowdStrike being a startup, there is a risk or chance or possibility that some big company wants to acquire us and maybe they want to close the source. We will do what we can to prevent that, because CrowdStrike is nothing without the community. We don't want to screw it over. So instead, we sort of set up like a fair deal, at least we think. The software is free to use. And if you want the block list, you share your own signals. And if you don't, well, then you don't get the signals, but CrowdStrike still works. CrowdStrike is still able to parse your log, detect attack, and stuff like that. You just don't get any signals from everyone else. A question that I often get asked is, what about privacy? And especially when we're used to, as a security professional, hating everything that's free on the internet because that means that you're the product. In this case, you're not the product, because honestly, we don't care about you. We care about the bad guys. So what CrowdStrike is collecting is literally just an offending IP, a source IP, a timestamp, and like a behavior. Behavior is like a scenario that describes what's going on. For instance, like SSH brute forcing or credit card stuffing or whatever. That's the only thing that's being recorded. CrowdStrike doesn't send your log anywhere. And also, if some of you are from Europe, we have something called GDPR, which basically means that we have to have a DPO, a data protection officer. We have to have made privacy impact assessments, and we also need to have processes to remove IPs from this list in case somebody who identified himself would do so. And so far, no criminals has done that, so that's good. Another question that I am often asked is how do we deal with poisoning and false positives? Because the block list is being distributed without questions asked, so to speak. It's being sent to the agent, and the agent just accepts it without questioning it. This means that if we simply can't accept that something is wrong with this, that there are faults in this. And in order to prevent poisoning, or first let me explain a little bit about how it works. When signals are sent to CrowdSec, it's going into the smoke database because there's no smoke without fire. Then the consensus engine, as we call it, is assessing the IPs, finding out whether it's bad or not. And if it is bad, then it will end up in the fire database and get distributed back. But in terms of poisoning, we have a mechanism called the trust rank. Basically, whenever all agents submitting signals to CrowdSec have a trust rank based on how long time we've known them and how long time we've known that they are reliable. So a new agent will start with a trust rank of 0, and then if they send consistent signals for 6 months without any errors, then they have achieved this trust rank of 99. The reason for this is, of course, to make it time-consuming if you want to poison us. So if you're a bad guy and you want to poison the CrowdSec database, first of all, it takes time. It also takes a lot of ASNs because in this voting process, basically, a malevolent IP needs a certain number of votes in order to be deemed malevolent, and those votes are given based upon the trust rank, meaning that simply an agent needs to have a certain trust rank in order to be able to affect this process. And on top of that, an ASN only has 1 vote. And this means that if you are a bad guy and you want to poison the CrowdSec database, you can't spin up like 1,000 VPSs on GCP or somewhere else because there simply won't be enough ASNs to make any difference. So instead, you as a criminal would have to have a fleet of bad agents, but spread across ASNs all around the world in order to ever have the chance of affecting the consensus process. But obviously that's not all that we do, because we also don't want false positives. And one way to do that is that we have our own fleet of honeypots that we use to compare signals from the crowd, or compare with the signals that we get from the crowd. And then I need some water. That was nice. The second thing, or the second mechanism of this is basically a whitelist. So all Google DNSs, all Google SEO bots, all Cloudflare CDNs, whatever. Services that you simply don't want to block, they cannot be blocked. And thirdly, it sounds a little bit like a pre-crime, maybe it is, but the way CrowdSec also works is that it looks at IPs from the same net block, and at some point, if CrowdSec has seen and deemed enough IPs from the same net block malevolent, then it will just block the rest of the net block, regardless of them having done anything wrong or not. We just assume that, yeah, you will also do something wrong, so we'll just block your head. And then, if it ends up in a fire database, then things are distributed back to CrowdSec agents. And if you want to know more about CrowdSec, then this is not the talk for it. I won't be talking about WizOS, CrowdSec supports, or anything more fancy technical about that. But if you want to know more, then I'll be around at the pool party, and I'll also be around at DEF CON. Just follow the trail of CrowdSec stickers like breadcrumbs. I'll be around. Before we move on to the Log4J part, it's important to understand that CrowdSec is not a buff. And this means that the way CrowdSec works, as I explained before, CrowdSec needs a log entry in order to block something, right? And that causes an inherent problem if you know a little bit about Log4j, because you know that if you're vulnerable, it only takes one connection, just one log entry, and then you're screwed. So we very much want to, first of all, as a security professional, I cannot recommend only depending on one control, but if you use CrowdSec as one of your controls, then there is a risk that CrowdSec may not detect it and block it if it's an IP that the crowd doesn't know already. But luckily, we did a little experiment with two identical servers, just to try and explore how much of what CrowdSec is blocked is being blocked by community, by reputation, by the block list, or by local signals and local processing. So in order for that, we set up two servers on OVH, cloud provider in Europe. They were completely identical. Both had the agent installed, and another one had what we call the bouncer, which is the IPS part installed as well. Basically, the bouncer plugs into the host firewall, so it blocks the connection. And it turned out that after 3 months, we compared the signals, or compared all the attacks that had seen, and it turned out that 92% of the bad traffic was aimed at a server. It's blocked just based on IP reputation. So basically, the server that was protected only saw like the orange part, and that is good. That is good news for if you're vulnerable for Log4j and plan to use CrowdSec or for that, or of course similar vulnerabilities. Yeah. And conclusion, of course, community matters, as we all know. Then let's move on to the part you came for, I hope. Log4j. If there should be a symbol or a few person in the room not knowing what Log4j is, I'll give a super short resume of it. On December 9, 2021, the Apache Foundation released information on a critical bug in the Log4j library, which was exploitable via remote code execution. And I didn't know that before then, but as it turns out, Log4j is used everywhere, and by everywhere I mean exactly that. And this screenshot is from a tweet from a guy called Cas van Kooten, and that's where it dawned on me how bad this is, because basically he said his name into this JNDI string, which contains the exploit and the payload, and he got back connections from Apple servers, meaning Apple servers were also vulnerable, and I was like, this is going to be a shit show. Right? So yeah, that quickly escalated into a worldwide panic, and everybody was either patching or releasing free tools, and resource 12 out, and so did we. As I said before, on December 9th, Apache released information about the vulnerability. On December 10th, CrowdSec released our first scenario detecting this Log4j thing. And then on December 12th, on December 13th and 16th, the scenario was updated, because as it's a quite natural development, because in the beginning it was just like a totally unobfuscated JNDI string containing the payload. Then over time it would be obfuscated in more and more obscene ways. And of course the scenario needs to be able to take care of that. And since it's grok, it's very static, so in the end it ended up containing 34 grok patterns for matching. And the last update was on December 20th, where somebody from the community added support for Unicode encoding. So to me, this is a really good example of why this crowd-based approach works, because basically we create a signal, and then it takes, I'll show you a little bit later how long time it takes, and then we start getting data back of and signals back of active malevolent actors in this. And that is, to me, I find that pretty amazing, because that is really what the community can do when we work together. So, as you can see, or rather, this is a timeline from starting from December 9th and ending on December, I don't know, 16, 17, something like that. No, sort of. Anyway, the big spike is when is on the December 12th, where we start getting signals. We end up at that point with around 1,000 IPs that we knew were actively exploiting this. But as we looked at the data, we saw something strange in the sense that one IP had a different scanning pattern, and we looked them up, and it turned out to be a German security research institute that were basically trying to find out how big is this problem by scanning. And we decided not to block them because we would then mess with their research, and also given that it's not a risk, so they were filtered out. This is an overview of the signals we have received from Log4j until now. The big dive is on the May 18th. Approximately for 3 months ago, we got around 100 signals every day. But today we get around 40 to 50. So Log4j is not dead. Rumors are gravely exaggerated. If you look carefully, there are a little bit of spikes after May 18th, but two biggest ones, they are quite interesting, so I'll talk a little bit about them. We're not really sure what happened because, as you may know, we don't really collect much about what's going on. We just know that we don't know exactly which payload or whatever bad actors are doing. We just know that the scenario was triggered. So based on that, it's relatively impossible to find out or try and find out what they were doing. But we know who did it. On June 21st, our data scientist tweeted this, that we saw a big spike, and that was actually the small spike of the big ones. And the IP is 13.89.48.118. They're still around, doing their business with Log4j. So you can see at the graph the two spikes there. The first spike is on was on the June 21st, and the second was on July 7th, and that was double as much. And now I need some more water. We don't know why, as I said, but we do have a theory, at least for June 21st, because as it turned out, on June 23rd, 2 days after the first spike, CISA, the cybersecurity infrastructure security agency in the US, released a bulletin saying that VMware Horizon, a Log4j-related vulnerability in VMware Horizon was actively being exploited. So it is, at least to us, it makes sense that this may have been what they were scanning for. They just knew it a little bit in advance. And as I said before, in terms of Log4j being everywhere, it's also highly unlikely that we've seen the rest of this. I'm pretty sure that there still are Log4j things out there, so Log4j is definitely not dead. And I guess when you think about it, it makes sense that we can also see other interesting things in the data that we see, that we receive. But to put things a little bit into perspective, this is an overview of the signals that we're receiving. For the last 3 months, in average, we've had 29 millions a month, broken down into weeks and hours. We have around 57,000 agents in 168 countries right now, and it's crazy to think that the number of countries just keep rising. I mean, a month ago, 2 months ago, it was 150, and I was thinking, well, now that's it, but it's not. We get around 20,000 IP addresses shared every 2 hours. There's a 2% renewal rate every 12 hours, which brings about 400 new IPs every 12 hours. And 12% of these IPs are then seen for the first time. So there is a large number of IPs or there's a big change. They're being shifted. There's a big shift presented of there's a big percentage of the IPs that are being shifted in the beginning, whereas over time it's a bit more static. There's an overview of that here. Less than 1 week, 12.63%, but over time, 2% of 2.79 of those IP over time are new. So the part of IPs that are new are decreasing over time. And one thing that we realized in the beginning of the CrowdStrike project is that the sparse resource on the internet, or the scarce resource on the internet, that's IP numbers. So basically, the more difficult we can make it for the bad guys to have new IPs, because they need the IPs for anonymity. So basically, they just hack around and try to find IPs that they can use for whatever they're doing. The more difficult we can make it for them, the faster we can burn their IPs, the better. And that is basically, I would say, core vision of CrowdStrike. Really being so many in number, so many agents in the world, and then on top of that, being able to block them right away. We are working with an organization who has a BDP block list that we want to work with. We want to push our feed into theirs, so that whatever CrowdStrike sees can be blocked on BDP router level, which is like the core, the foundation of the internet, so that there will be null routed. They won't be able to do anything as soon as they're detected. That is really the vision of CrowdStrike. And basically, as this says, that they are really always looking for new IPs. If we can disrupt this process, then things are better for anyone or everyone except them, of course. This is an overview of the block lists in total. On the left side, you can see how many times this IP has ended up on a block list. And then there are like 50 times, 25 times, 10, and 5, as far as I think. Yeah. And it turns out that 79.5% of the IPs in the community block list, they are there more or less permanently, for some reason. I want to talk a little bit about a layer 7 DDoS attack that we saw on a random user. Yeah, they're big, but they're still random. I'll show you the graph of the signals that we're receiving versus the IPs that were blocked. This is a 2-in-1 graph, so it's a little bit confusing. But the purple line is the signals that this agent sent, and the yellow was the unique IPs that were blocked. So on July 27th, that is the big blue spike to the left, to the right. More than 4,000 threats was reported on 1.8 thousand IPs. Whereas on August 1st, where the big spike is the yellow one, more than 8.8 thousand IPs were blocked, unique IPs. So this was really a DDoS attack. But the good thing or luckily for the user, they had CrowdStrike, so nothing happened. In terms of Spring4Shell, we had a big spike on July 16th, kind of like the Log4J spike, only that this time around we have no idea what's going on, basically. So we saw that 178 agents were reporting signals on this scenario, but we haven't really been able to find out. So if you know anything about Spring4Shell, please let me know. Another thing that we found out is that zip is being constantly hammered, and by hammered I mean brute forced. Back in November, we were approached by a user, a friend's voice over IP provider, who wanted us to create a scenario to detect stuff like this. This zip scenario was installed on our honeypots. It's a relatively dumb scenario in the sense that it doesn't really look into what you do when you connect to it. You just count the connections to it. But given that it's a honeypot, there is no reason why anybody would want to connect to it with something with a legitimate purpose. And another thing with a honeypot is that it doesn't have a bouncer. It doesn't block anything. But that being said, on one day, June 23rd, we got around 83,000 signals just on that specific scenario, just from our fleet of honeypots, which isn't that big. So if you look at it, if you look at the number of agents compared to the amount of signals we get out of it, then the SIP is definitely the most hammered scenario. But it's not the only one. SSH is also. Our data is a little bit biased in that CrowdSec is mostly for Linux. And when you install CrowdSec, it automatically detects if SSH is installed, and SSH is installed on Linux. So that's not that big a surprise that this is the most common signal. Daily we get around 1 million signals from more than 5,000 agents, and around 60,000 bad actors reported. Top threats, you'll recognize the orange and the cyan one, because those are SSH brute force and SSH slow brute force, and together they're more than 60%. Whereas something like Windows brute forcing, that is around 2%. But again, our data is biased. Windows is not supported until, officially, until a couple of weeks ago. So obviously, there aren't that many of those around. And honestly, who in their right mind would put a Windows server unprotected on the internet, right? Yep. Another quite interesting thing that we can see in our data is how good are the different cloud actors in cleaning up after these attacks. And we have looked at the data and did the way it works. When an IP is being hacked or is being taken over by a bad actor, it will start appearing up in our smoke database, obviously. And then when it doesn't anymore, we assume that it's being cleaned. So in that period of time from once it was seen, the first time it was seen, to when it's no longer seen, an average of that based on all the IPs shows that AWS in average takes 3 days to clean up, whereas OVH, they take a little bit longer, 17 days. We haven't done it for all cloud providers yet, but we will be doing dedicated reporting on ASNs based on ASN in Q3. It's not completely fair to say that AWS are bad and that AWS are good and OVH are bad. It's not that simple, obviously, because there is a huge difference in what you choose to host on that virtual server that they have. Because if you choose to host like a PHP CMS that you maybe not be so good at updating, then you're definitely way more vulnerable than if you just have Linux with SSH, for instance. So yeah, and also this is a little bit more based on this is also ASN reputation, but more broadly. It's a little bit small, so I don't know how much you can see. But on the y-axis, there is a number of IPs assigned to this ASN, and the size of the bubble is the number of IPs that are being reported, because that is not necessarily the same, showing how widespread is whatever compromise is going on. And interestingly enough, in top 4, that is ChinaNet. With 50,000 reported IPs. DigitalOcean, 24,000, that's half. Number 3 is China Unicom China, 169 Backbone, 9,000, and Amazon, 7,000. So just to say that, of course, there is a difference between the various ASNs and the various providers in how good they are and how good they want to be at cleaning up after the bad guys. Yeah. And if you look at the legend, which I know is totally impossible, then you can see which kind of attacks are primarily being detected. And orange is brute force, is our friend brute force attacks. And yeah, watch the recording. What can I say? For details, of course. Malicious IP origin distributed between cloud actors. Interestingly enough, AWS are still our number 2 here. They have a lot of stuff that apparently, even though that they do a lot to clean them out, basically it's not enough. DigitalOcean, yeah, they are winning this one. In terms of network strength, these are the countries that has the most number of agents, but France, US, Germany, Netherlands, United Kingdom, which includes Dublin, and Dublin is a huge AWS hosting site. Cloud computing kind of muddles the waters a little bit here, because a couple of months ago I was speaking in the BSides Pristina in Kosovo and Albania, and in countries like that, hosting a server is way too expensive. So they use cloud computing all the time. So whoever is using an IP and only using cloud, we don't know where they're from. But as I said before, there's around 56,000 installs in total. And that was it for my talk. You can find us on Twitter, crowd_security. We have a Discord community. If you scan the QR code, you will get in there right away. We are running workshops for the time being for beginners, where we walk you through how to install CrowdSec, how to install a bouncer on Nginx, stuff like that, how to set up capture to mitigate. You can also send me a mail, klaus@crowdsec.net, or you can hit me up here at BSides Las Vegas, which is soon over. I'll be around tonight for a pool party, and I'll also be at DEF CON. And as I said before, just follow the trail of stickers, and you'll find me. All right.
All right, so we're gonna have time for questions, but unfortunately, we got word that there's some issues with the wireless mics, so we're gonna have to stick with the wired mics. If any of you have questions, even more reason you might have to come forward and ask and just shout it out. But Klaus, if you could just repeat the question for everyone.
Yeah, that would probably work. Okay.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Any questions? Yeah.
Why do you think DigitalOcean was ahead of AWS in that last slide? And can you speak to how attackers are rotating IP addresses? How trivial and fast that is in them?
Oh, sorry. And the question was, why is DigitalOcean topping that list? And in terms of rotating IPs, I'm not sure I completely understand.
I guess just maybe help unpack that slide there about they rotate IP addresses.
Yeah.
Just unpack that a little bit further.
Yeah. Well, I don't really know why DigitalOcean is topping the list. As I said before, it has a lot to do with what people are using their VPSs for, and of course there is also like how good is the company themselves at following up on whoever customer has their VPS compromised. There may be some procedural there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know really much. I don't know what more I can say about the rotation of IPs other than it's that given that the bad guys want to be anonymous, they change IPs a lot. So the faster the providers are cleaning up, then they need to find new pools of IPs and also stay anonymous. So yeah, that's basically it. As I said, I don't really know what else to say about it. I guess that's just how it works. Yeah. But if there's no more questions, find me. I may or may not have a lot of stickers to give you. And if not, you've probably seen them outside because I've been throwing them around like crazy. And yeah, and also this is not an official BSides Las Vegas t-shirt. This is a complete ripoff. Yeah, and I also have stickers in that design, of course. Yep. All right, thanks for your time.